Imagine this, you're driving down a 2-lane road and a deer runs out in front of another car, and that car swerves to miss the deer and hits you head on. Do you have a case?
Welcome to the Williams, ELLEBY HOWARD and Easter YouTube channel, and that is exactly what we're going to talk about today.
So the very first thing that stands out to me when we're thinking about a scenario like this is what we call the sudden emergency doctrine. That is a defense in Georgia that if you encounter a sudden emergency and there's no way that you can avoid it and you end up getting a wreck, that can be a defense if somebody sues you for the wreck that's caused. However, it's not quite that simple. There's other things that you need to consider when an animal runs out into the road that ends up causing a wreck between two vehicles. And I think the first one's going to be, is the person who swerves to avoid the deer driving distracted? Do they have something that's distracting them so that they should have seen the deer in time, but because they were looking at their phone or they were fiddling with the radio or doing something else, they didn't see the deer until the last second and then hit you? And if you can prove that they were distracted, then you may still have a case.
Yeah, so this is always like a fun law school type hypothetical because it is very, very fact specific. Mm-hmm. You know, on its face, it's like, well, how in the world could someone be responsible if just a random deer comes out of nowhere and you hit it and all that? But I mean, most of the time when you're running into a deer, you're in a rural part of the state here in Georgia. I mean, there's a lot of deer all over the place, and so you see the deer sign, so that's sort of a warning to the drivers, like, hey, you need to drive a little more alert because you might be passing some farms or whatever. That deer are going to be running across the street, right? So if you can prove that that person maybe had noticed or should have known that there was a possibility of deer running out, then it kind of shifts things a little bit. It's like, okay, well, what did you do to maybe guard against that potential known hazard? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's very fact specific, very tricky. If you can prove that someone's distracted, you might be able to make a claim against them, for any injuries or damages that are caused. But also too, a lot of times it could be just the sort of that sudden emergency defense, like that deer literally came out of nowhere. There's nothing I could do. I did the best I could to try to avoid hitting the deer, also try to avoid hitting the car. So it's a very, very tricky fact pattern. Yeah,
I think other things to consider too are, and like Chase said, it's all very fact specific here, but let's consider the weather conditions. Mm-hmm. So what if it's raining, or if there's ice on the road, or if it's snowing, and the person who swerves to avoid the deer is driving too fast in order to stop before any hazards may come up, right? So you may be able to show that they're driving too fast for conditions. So if it was a dry roadway and they tried to stop, maybe they could have stopped in time, but because there's ice or the road's wet or whatever, they couldn't stop in time to avoid hitting the deer, and so they swerved and then hit you. So if you can prove they're driving too fast for conditions, you may be able to overcome that sudden emergency defense.
Well, then to take it another step further, we're talking about wild animals, right? Deer, mm-hmm. things like that. They're not kept in, pastures or dogs and things like that people own. So, if it's a dog that runs out and hits you, well, where did the dog come from? Did the owner know that the dog got out? Has the dog been known to run out to the street and, mm-hmm. Things like that? If it's cattle, right? Did the fence break? Did the rancher do anything to try to keep that, fence from breaking? Do they have knowledge that the fence would break or the cattle are getting out and causing a wreck? So if you're dealing with, livestock or domesticated animals, it's going to be a little bit different than when you're dealing with wild animals that you really have no control over.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point too, because especially in South Georgia and North Georgia and those more rural counties where there's a lot of cattle, there have been some serious cases where people were hurt really right. bad, where a farmer maybe didn't allow them to, but the farmer knew that there was an issue with their fence. They knew that their cows had been getting out, and then the cow's in the road, and then somebody hits the cow and gets hurt really bad. And then lots of times the defense we see there is the farmer says, well, this had never happened before, and that may be a good defense. Or we say, or the farmer may say, well, the cow weighs 4,000 pounds. How did you not see it? It's a long straight roadway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cows don't jump across the road like deer do.
Yeah, exactly. In that situation, it may be tougher if you have a long straight roadway, but if you're just coming around the curve and you hit this animal, then you may have a good case against the rancher or the farmer. But all in all, I think these type cases are very specific. You may have a wild animal like a deer, you may have a domesticated animal like a dog or a cow, You may have a completely crazy person that says the Easter bunny jumped across the road, and then you know they're full of crap.
Yeah, especially if we're not even close to Easter, because everyone knows the Easter bunny's not out when it's not close to Easter. So.
That's right. So anyway, if you find yourself in a situation where you either hit a domesticated animal or you've been in a wreck with someone else who claimed that a deer ran across the road or a dog or cow or whatever came out into the road and they swerved to hit you, it's probably best to reach out to an attorney in the state that you're at so they can look at your state-specific laws and let you know under your specific factual circumstances whether you may have a case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say too, you know, we have other videos where we talk about the importance of getting evidence and taking photos and tracking down witnesses and things like that. I think with these types of cases, that's even more vital. If there are any independent witnesses, photos, anything you can get from the scene to go ahead and document it as accurately as possible.
Yep, that's right. All right, well, if this video has been helpful to you, give us a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, we will see you next week.